It's all about the money this week, how the governor wants to spend your tax dollars and if it will make a difference in handling the Flint water crisis and revamping Detroit public schools. Plus, we're talking a little politics and the headlines that we saw this week. Nolan and Stephen are here. There is a lot to get to, and My Week starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas. We are the business leaders for Michigan.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so happy to have you with us. We are talking money tonight and the state budget. But wait, don't zone out just yet. These are your tax dollars. So are we spending in the right places? Infrastructure, higher education, and the two biggest problems statewide, Detroit Public Schools and the water crisis in Flint. We are going to put it all in perspective for you tonight. So let's take a look at what the governor is proposing. Infrastructure upgrades, $165 million for a newly created Michigan Infrastructure Fund. A K-12 funding boost by $150 million. More spending for higher education, over $60 million, brings it back to levels from 5 years ago. A proposal for $720 million over the next 10 years for Detroit Public Schools, and a large amount for Flint, $195 million to deal with continued fallout from the water crisis there.
Clean drinking water is a human necessity. Residents across Flint, especially children, have been exposed and impacted by lead in water. In addition, they're having to use bottled water and filters today instead of taking water out of the tap. That's not a situation anyone should have to go through. Being exposed to lead is harmful, particularly to children, and you have to assume those effects are lifelong. One of the things that's clear in this situation is we must assume all children have been exposed in Flint. And part of the recommendations are to actually approach this in a way that we're going to work on the assumption all children have been exposed, and then work on finding the ways to help the children that are showing any implications of lead poisoning in some fashion.
All right, so you hear the governor talking about the budget, but you also hear protesters in the background. They were at the Capitol when he was presenting his budget. But here's how the $195 million breaks down for Flint. $37 million for safe drinking water efforts, $15 million for food and nutrition, $63 million for improving the social and educational well-being of Flint children, $30 million in water bill credits, and $50 million in reserve for the future. We are going to talk about all the key aspects of the budget tonight, and we are going to start, though, with Flint. So let's bring in Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. All right, guys, we've been talking the last couple of weeks. All right, let's wait to see what the governor has in his proposed budget when it comes to helping out Flint. Stephen, I'm going to start with you tonight. In looking at the numbers and the breakdown, was it enough what he proposed?
I mean, I think it's a big number, and it you know, the way they're dividing it up makes some sense in terms of what you need to do right now in Flint. But I think even the governor acknowledges this is a beginning, and you're going to need more over time. My disappointment, I think, is with this being one-time money that we have found in one place or another, and that the governor didn't take the opportunity to get a discussion started about changing tax structure, changing the way we deal with the relationship between cities and state government to get more money overall to cities. We continue to talk about Flint and the water crisis as though it really is just about lead pipes and water quality, when in fact, you know, the people of Flint could get clean water tomorrow and their lives would still be desperately undesirable in terms of the kind of opportunities they have and in terms of the kind of services they have in that city. The governor had an opportunity. They were selling this budget last week as him sort of taking on the persona of a New Deal Democrat, you know, Franklin Roosevelt type budget. There's nothing even remotely like that in this budget. It is one-time money that they're grabbing from here to move to here. It is not a rethinking of the way that we finance government in the state of Michigan.
There was a little bit more in terms of revenue sharing for cities, and he did say we're going to now have this new infrastructure fund. Nolan, how important is it when you're looking at this budget that a lot of these things are also going to be appropriations? They're not going to be waiting until October of next year to see a lot of this money.
I mean, and that's good. And I think, disagree with, a bit with Steve, there are things in that budget to improve the long-term lives, not just of the people in Flint, but around the state. There's money in there for preschool education to get our education systems up and running a little better. That helps kids all over the state, including Flint. There's job training money. We desperately need to get our workers trained for the jobs that are coming into Michigan. We are now in a situation where we have more jobs, high-tech jobs and high-skilled jobs, than we have workers to fill them. We need to be able to take advantage of it. There's money in there for that. This $165 million to start addressing the infrastructure. It's not a ton of money when you consider the need,
right,
but it's a start, and it's more than what we've been able to do for 10 years. And I think the money for higher education, bringing that, restoring that back to where it was, is a huge deal, because
and we are going to talk about that in just a few minutes. I do want to concentrate a little bit on Flint and talking about the infrastructure. This week, the mayor called again and saying, look, I have a plan, a $55 million plan to replace the pipes in Flint. Still, the governor's office and the administration is not sure that that is the exact way to go, that they said they've set aside $25 million in case that may happen somewhere down the road. My question is, should that end up happening sooner than later, and should the governor be going in terms to the federal government and saying we need to start to get that money?
Well, I mean, you've got our congressional delegation on both sides of the aisle already talking about that in Washington.
Should the governor have gone to those congressional hearings yesterday and said, all right, I'm here, I'm going to answer some questions, and while I'm here, we need some kind of money?
I think that would satisfy a lot of people who want to see him on the hot seat and want to see him squirm and sweat. Name the last governor of any state who appeared before a congressional hearing, though. I think that's just not the way this works. You don't get to call governors of states before Congress. There is at least in principle, a separation of powers issue there. More important that the officials who he appointed to manage water quality in the state of Michigan were there to answer the questions about what they did or what they didn't do. I think replacing the pipes, again, really important, but look at what that looks like statewide as opposed to just in Flint. I mean, we are talking about this as though this is a crisis that unfolded over the last 2 years and has no other context, and that's just not true. It has other context in Flint, it has other context around the state of Michigan, and my disappointment is that the governor didn't get after those things. $165 million for infrastructure statewide, I could spend that in a weekend and you wouldn't see the difference.
And it's more than what we have been spending. As far as replacing pipes, that may be the answer, it may not be, and I think we need to approach this very cautiously and know what we're doing. I've talked to people and read some things over the last week that suggest you could disturb more lead and add more lead to the environment that way than simply going the recoding process. And I'm really not a believer you can do that for $55 million in 18 months like they propose. I think it's going to be a massive job. They don't even know where the lead pipes are yet.
All right, something else I want to talk about this week in terms of Flint is we saw more emails coming out having to do with the health department and with the DEQ and talking about the Legionnaire's disease problem. And again, it was a lot of this finger pointing, cover your behind, it's not me, it's off to somebody else. And so if we're seeing this culture at the DEQ, especially, what other state agencies I'm thinking about do we need to be?
DHS in there.
That we need to be careful of, because again, and I think we've all been in those work situations where you work with certain people that are like, it's not my problem, or I didn't do it, or there's a lot of finger pointing, and I'm just wondering, God, that they can't only be happening at the DEQ.
It's not. It's a culture in state government, and I think one of the questions that the governor himself ought to be really concerned about and addressing quite publicly is this something that's cropped up since he has been governor? Is this a function of the way he sees government? Conservatives in this state and around the country have talked for years about how government has too much money and not enough accountability. Is this a function of trying to strip government to bare, or is this a wider culture in government that has been around for a long time? I don't think we know the answer to that, but I do think he needs to start talking about it.
Last word on Flint. What do you think?
Of course, we know the answer to that. We had the kids killed in the DHS during the terms of the last governor. This was a government failure at every level: state, federal, local. I think this is a symptom of government and a civil service system where there's no accountability, no expectations, people are in the habit of just shoving things along and not dealing with it.
Where we've also, vastly underinvested in all of these agencies. One of the first things Governor Snyder did, for instance, was take a bunch of money out of DEQ when he was elected in 2010. Did that help or did that hurt? These are things that he's got to start sort of facing up to. The various ideological theories of government.
So you're saying this happened at the DEQ because Governor Snyder took funding away from the DEQ?
It may have. I think it may have. I don't know. But I think the various ideologies about government, both on the left and the right, tend to govern the way we see it instead of looking at what does government need to do, what money does it need to do it, and how do we hold them accountable.
But this wasn't resources, this was competence, this was human error, people not doing their job. And what we might want to take a look at, we've got some of the best universities in this state, research universities, people with technical talent. Why aren't we using our universities more to supplement the expertise of these state departments?
You asked this question, did this happen at DEQ because of the money that was taken out of it? Don't you want an answer to that question? Don't you want the governor to go figure that out? Don't you think that's possible, that was one of the reasons that this happened? I mean, these are the things that we need to be talking about, and I think instead of arguing about the ideology about government, let's look at what the effect of the things that have been done.
Flat out lied here and flat out misled and misinterpret reports. I don't see how that's a resource issue.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to move on here tonight, checking out the budget when it comes to Detroit Public Schools. The number the governor threw out this week wasn't new, about $720 million over 10 years. But where he'll get the cash from is new. He plans to tap the state's tobacco settlement fund to pay DPS debt. Is this a good idea to take the money from
Well, we always, that's like some cash cow
that we always... It's a never-ending fund.
It's the magic lamp.
Tobacco, right? I mean, again, another opportunity to start a discussion about financing and what money we need to have the government that we want and how we're going to get it. And he doesn't do it. He says, well, this stash of money over here, this magic stash of money, I'll just go back to the well.
But don't you have to say that you can't stop and have conversations. You've got to at least have some action and say, we're going to take it here,
all
and
these
then have the larger conversations.
The more you talk, the poorer we get,
okay,
Steve.
So so let's put out a budget. Let's put out a budget that includes talking about a service tax. Let's put out a budget that says, let's start a campaign to change the way that we collect income tax in this state from flat to progressive. Let's talk about the way that business taxes are structured in the state. I mean, the budget document is the place to start actually not just having the conversation, but talking about policy.
Can you really have that conversation, though, again, in an election year, too?
But this is a governor who's been afraid of the legislature since he got elected.
You better be afraid of the people you start all of those taxes. It's not going to fly here.
Do we want
the $72 million for Detroit schools is the start of a pay down of that debt. If you could erase that $720 million in debt, the governor's office claims it frees up about $1,000 per student for the classrooms. That's a big deal because right now you look at the per pupil funding in Detroit and you see a big number, but a large chunk of that is going to service. No, it's going to service the debt. If you could, and sure, special ed, but it also goes to service the debt. If you could take that debt service money and put it back in the classroom, that's going to help those schools. That's going to get it's $1,000 a kid.
Yeah.
That's a big number, and this has got to be done. You can't let that debt just sit there and continue
But here again,
to grow.
the bigger issue is you have a district that's still dying in terms of population, where so much of the money that goes per pupil goes to things like special ed. The district is upside down the way it's financed, and there are other districts like that. There again, opportunity to start saying, why don't we do it differently? This governor has a jelly spine again, coming out and saying, well, let's fix this immediate problem right here and ignore
But
everything else.
operationally, you eliminate that debt, and the district starts with a balanced budget.
I want to know who's
Maybe.
calling. I want to know who's calling Nolan right now on the
That'd be
show.
Governor.
It's the governor.
It's the governor. He's calling to give you a little bit of.
Paul W. Smith.
There you go. All right, hey, before we
can't turn it
you
off.
can't
He wants
turn
you
it
to be
off.
on the radio.
You know, we're going to take the phone away from you because if you can't learn to turn it off, then you shouldn't
But
have one at all. No. We're moving on. I'm cutting you
wasn't
off.
done.
I'm cutting you off
I'll just
because
tell-
other
I'll-
notable.
I'll
no,
just tell it to Paul.
Stop talking. The other notable things in the budget: funding for higher ed restored back to the level it was when the governor took office 5 years ago. K through 12 is also growing as well to pay down some of the legacy costs there as well.
Yeah,
This
let's
has
go
gotta
back
be,
to where we were 10 years
Hang
behind.
on, this
as
has got to
opposed
be
15.
good news. I'm talking about higher ed funding
Yeah.
first for a lot of the business leaders who have been pushing for this, and universities, and also keeping the tuition cap is also about 4.5%.
Yeah, it's good. We need to invest in higher education. That is a priority of the business community. Business leaders of Michigan put out their next phase of their Turnaround Michigan plan this week, and it talked about higher investment in our universities, higher investment in the research the universities are doing in terms of mobility and autonomous cars, the M-City, and the exciting project that's going on at Willow Run now to turn that into a center for autonomous driving study and bring the University of Michigan in there too. That's pretty cool stuff.
Talk to me about K through 12. You're still not pleased with the bump up in that.
It's not that I'm not pleased with any of this. I think it does represent, a step back toward some rational financing of the things that we need. They're just small steps. That's all. I mean,
Another tax, right?
It could have been much
University
bigger.
tax.
It's just, it's just a way of, it's just a different way of thinking of the way that we pay for government. Right now, I think there are so many signs that what we're doing doesn't work, is not taking care of ourselves, is not taking care of our infrastructure, it's not investing in our futures. To say today we want to go back to funding levels of 2010 when we were 10 years behind what everyone else is doing is not particularly ambitious, that's all.
All right, so let me ask you this then, because you talk about that we need to be looking at the bigger picture and we need to have these larger conversations. All right, so when does this happen? How do we do that, or how do we get our legislators to do that? Or does this have to be leadership from the government? Or so let's start this larger conversation.
The answer is I don't know. I don't know. We had a Democratic governor who didn't do this for 8 years. I mean, let's be honest. Jennifer Granholm was also under ambitious in terms of the way she dealt with cities and universities and education. This governor comes in, says, I'm going to straighten out the mess, and then I'm going to invest in people and infrastructure in the state. It's year 6 of him being in office. We're still not seeing his 6th budget doesn't include that kind of thing. There is a culture among voters that resists the idea of more taxes. Some of this stuff, though, is not about more taxes. It's not about higher taxes. If you went to a graduated income tax, 90% of payers would pay less. If you talk about a service tax, again, most people wouldn't feel that, but business would. We got to talk about whose interests matter the most, and how do we structure government to reflect?
Well, I think
All right, last word,
the
Nolan,
governor
on this.
understands that that sort of tax system and that sort of increase of tax burden would just kill growth in this state. And when you look at what he's done in terms of the things you don't necessarily see, the paying down of long-term debt and getting this state to the place where debt's not such a burden anymore and our future is a little secure. That's what he promised to do. That's what he is doing. I think this budget is starting to reflect the prosperity, the returning prosperity to Michigan, and he is starting to put money back in places that were cut over the last 15 years.
All right.
But the pie, he talked about when he was elected, you got to grow the pie, that the pie has got to get bigger, and you got to stop trying to sort of slice it in different ways. The pie for government is not getting bigger.
This is a larger budget than it was last year, and you're still spending a quarter of it on Medicare, $2 billion on corrections.
And you need that.
Right.
Well, you don't need the corrections part, but you do need the Medicare.
But that's a conversation for another day.
Right.
All right.
Prison reform.
All right, now on to politics. We're focusing on the Democrats tonight, the continued rise of Bernie Sanders, and how Hillary Clinton fights off the wave of anti-establishment sentiment that is ruling this election. There's a debate tonight, a PBS debate tonight as well. So let me start with you, Nolan. What do you? A lot of issues with Hillary's campaign right now, but do you think Bernie Sanders is really a big threat to her?
I don't think he's a big threat. I think right now, though, what he is doing is exposing her weaknesses, and I think that's worrying the campaign. It's been interesting over the last few days since New Hampshire to see how the Clinton camp has responded to the Bernie Sanders thumping. They've gone, complete Clinton here. Bernie Sanders is a racist. Bernie Sanders is a sexist. That had been a fairly cordial campaign. During the debates, they were, oh gosh, I respect Mrs. Clinton, I respect Mr. Sanders, and they've taken the gloves off this week, and they're giving him the treatment. They've trotted out feminists, they've trotted out civil rights leaders to disparage Bernie Sanders on his record in these areas. He's got to be prepared for this to get a lot nastier than I think he's used to.
But you can't discount the fact that he is resonating with a lot of people.
He's resonating with young people, which is the thing that pushed him over in New Hampshire. I mean, he got a lot of young voters out, really enthusiastic about him, a lot of young women. The gaps on the gender side of things, women 54 and over or 45 and over, being so in favor of Hillary Clinton, under the exact opposite, going for Sanders. I think those are things that if you're her, there isn't much doubt that you're going to win the nomination based on the national polls. But as Nolan points out, those weaknesses. Can she connect with young people? Can she connect with young women in a way that will get them to the polls in November, when that's going to really matter for her?
And another thing that is really hurting her is the honesty factor. When they exit polled a lot of people in New Hampshire, is that
people don't like her.
That was astounding. When
the numbers were astounding.
When they asked voters who said honesty and credibility was their primary concern, that was about a third of Democratic voters. He won 92% of that group. That suggests a real weakness in the general election. And again, what they're looking at, this is the Sanders thing, and seeing where they're vulnerable in the campaign toward November. And she lost, Steve, almost every demographic group. It wasn't just young voters. Almost every demographic group,
she went
except older women and rich people.
Yeah.
I mean, she lost big with the middle class. She lost big among men.
But this is also in a state whose population doesn't look like almost any other.
The rest of the country.
So I think extrapolating that is
why it's
difficult.
a bad thing to give Iowa and New Hampshire so much influence over this early
All right, so
voting.
then that's my next question. I mean, you look at New Hampshire and say, what does that really represent? Because if you're saying, you look at the numbers in the rest of the country, so then what was this, then do we really even care what happened in New Hampshire?
I mean, I think we care, but you got to keep it in perspective. I mean, it's not indicative of what will happen in South Carolina. I can guarantee you that. That's a much different state with a more traditional Democratic base among voters. Large African American population, more urban sort of places. I don't know what it means. I mean, I think it does suggest that she's got some problems with connecting with certain kinds of voters who are going to matter in November. Now, it won't matter as much if the Republicans nominate someone like Donald Trump. I mean, she will have a much easier time drawing the distinction between herself and him if someone like a Marco Rubio
The bigger
didn't
problem
do
for
that.
her is the enthusiasm issue, whether she can turn
She had to turn her
voters out in November, no matter
Democrats
who,
will not
and
have a
was
problem coming out of Donald Trump as on the Republican side.
I mean, you don't know. You don't know which sort of group he's going to draw out. I think she's got to worry about enthusiasm. She's got to worry about that credibility issue. But you asked whether Iowa, New Hampshire matter. They obviously matter, because look how many candidates they washed out. I think we would be better off with
to stay in.
Right, because the money dries up if they lose that big. I think we'd be better off with multi-state regional primaries in the beginning.
All right, and now it's time for a look at some headlines.
That's not the headlines music.
It is the headlines music.
I thought it had different music.
No, that's the headlines music we always have, Stephen. Thank you for paying attention.
Some fancy different music for that.
You guys are killing me today. All right, so the one headline that I looked at, did you guys see that the Ellen show gave $500,000 to Spain Elementary Middle School in Detroit in terms of like technology, gift cards for teachers, and whole lot of stuff for them. But it was, again, a sad look at displaying the absolutely terrible conditions of some of the schools in DPS. But good for them for getting a little bit of money.
Everybody's on board now. Everyone wants to save Flint and DPS.
We ought to milk that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, and good for those kids there. They were super
You got to
excited.
start a Hollywood office.
That's right. No film credit. No,
Bring
no,
back
no,
the
no.
film
No
credits,
film credits.
right?
All right, Nolan, go ahead.
Well, you had this situation out at the tech center in GM yesterday where a woman's daughter showed up and started stabbing her with a knife, a steak knife, and the valet happened to he had a concealed weapons permit, and he pulled his gun and he put a stop to it, probably saved the woman's life. And initially he got fired because you're not supposed to have a gun on the job. Now, I don't know, I think they're working through that. He may get his job back, but it does show sort of an interesting dilemma here. He saved a woman's life, but he wasn't supposed to have that gun.
Don't be shooting
All right,
people.
we only
He
have
didn't
30.
shoot
We
anybody.
only
He
have
didn't
30
have to.
seconds. Only have 30 seconds left, Stephen.
The new I-75 project, I'm against it.
You-
I don't like wider freeways. I don't want
You
more
don't like
freeways.
infrastructure? You don't
I
like
want
construction?
Well, he
mass
lives
transit.
2 minutes from work.
Mass
Yeah.
transit.
Well, that means if there's wider freeways, you can actually come north and come visit some
That's a
people in the
lesson. I
suburbs.
live 2 minutes from work. Why don't more people do that?
You want all
There
those
we go.
folks to come and live in right?
Hey, we're going
would.
to talk about mass transit another day. I have a couple of ideas for that. All right, thanks, guys. That's going to do it for My Week. Thanks for joining us. Remember to mark your calendar for our live My Week presidential primary show, Monday, March 7th at 7:30. You can always find us at myweek.org. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks for watching and supporting Detroit Public TV. We'll see you next week.
Did you know 2 Men and a Truck has performed 5.5 million moves to date? Or Dawn Food Products, the customer service staff at their international home office in Jackson, Michigan, speaks over 15 different languages. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas. This spirit of entrepreneurism is the foundation for a rich and prosperous future. We are the business leaders for Michigan.
Funding is also provided by Delta,